Can you put a dollar figure on waste, fraud, and corruption right now?
We estimate that it's at least, if you pile in mismanagement, it's at least $5 billion.
So are you saying then you can fix the budget crisis by cuts alone then, by fixing waste, fraud, mismanagement, and cuts?
Absolutely. We have to.
So how do you get, so Senator, how would you get, well, first of all, you don't think you have to do the whole $13 billion in a year, right?
The $13 billion is,
I've talked about this before. I mean, if we could zero in on this, I really two things. If you could, the 10, you know, you've used the phrase in the past, and I know you've amended it, about a 10% across the board cut.
Right.
Today you say a dime on a dollar. What, so how would you cut?
Yeah. Well, Governor Quinn's failures have accumulated over $13 billion in deficits that are now debt. We estimate. There clearly isn't any transparency.
So you think you only have to cut about $5 billion in the first year?
But the deficit is about $5 billion. I hesitate to use the word only because $5 billion is a horrifying number that they've built up to. But we spend $55 billion a year.
The operating budget, as you know, is really...
Well, the only thing that you really can't...
About 23, really.
Well, but that's again, that's again a delusionary distortion by Governor Quinn. Really, the only thing that you can't deal with...
It's the budget document.
But it's a delusionary distortion.
So you would take some of the capital money?
No, let me say this. The two areas that are sacrosanct are the pension payment obligations and the bond payments. The rest of the budget can be remanaged and deconstructed and reconstructed. That leaves our estimate about $45 billion, regardless of using terms like general revenue fund. Politicians like Quinn, Governor Quinn, have distorted the real facts to forward their argument of a huge tax increase. Governor Quinn's going to do everything he can to force a tax increase down the throats of Illinois taxpayers, and it's going to do nothing but continue to hurt our ability to create and bring jobs. As I've traveled around the state visiting with small family businesses and large businesses, you can see it. They are fearful of a government that is out of balance, but also fearful of a high tax rate increase. Their stockholders are going to demand a return on their investment. And if Governor Quinn pushes a tax increase, their stockholders, unfortunately, are going to reconsider where they're doing business. Those decisions will cost Illinois families jobs.
Let's stipulate all that. So take me back to the $45 billion. If I'm not mistaken, you would in fact take some of the capital funds and spend them to...
No, we've never said to go into the capital funding bill is a different bill. It is funded through motor fuel tax dollars and other mechanisms that aren't part of that. The capital fund...
You reference the $55 billion, you're talking capital funds in there.
Well, there's an annual appropriation from the Illinois Department of Transportation, but the bond payments go to make the capital funds that you're talking about.
So you would divert some of the capital funds, right?
No, I didn't know. In fact, I've called for eliminating the diversion of the road fund so we can balance our measurement into capital.
So in terms of what, do you think it's been smart to take and borrow against the revenue stream on the tobacco settlement?
No.
You oppose that?
It's a one-time fix that'll have long-term implications that will be damaging.
So that takes you up to about 14 or 15 or 16 billion, right? If you take that out.
Potentially. Which is why we have to build resources in an operating budget to pay down the backlog of unpaid bills.
But how long would those resources take to build? You mentioned trying to bring in business.
We
Would that take some time to bring in those resources?
Well, once we balance our budget and build in the resources to pay the backlog of unpaid bills, our bond rating will move from the worst in the nation to the best. Upon that period of time, we believe we can pay those off. I believe we can pay those off in 2 to 3 years.
How so?
By building a revenue source into the budget to pay them off in 2 to 3 years.
And what would that entail?
Balancing the budget.
Balancing the budget 2 to 3 years, you'll be...
Balancing the budget the first year. Building into that balanced budget resources that will meet our obligations as promised.
You criticized Governor Quinn for pay raises to some of the staff. If you were governor, how would you handle that situation differently?
There would have been no pay raised. The private sector is struggling. Let's face it, the public and private sector are out of balance. Governor Quinn giving pay raises to public sector employees while the private sector has gone without pay raises and with pay reductions is clueless, as the Chicago Tribune said.
There's a theory out there that there could be a vote on a tax increase before the next governor takes a seat as in January. Your thoughts on a potential tax vote before the next governor takes?
Let's face it, this election is a referendum on tax rate increases. If Governor Quinn were elected for the first time, the people would have spoken and said, we want a tax rate increase. I know the people don't want that. And when I win, when I'm fortunate enough to be governor, I will stave off the legislature from giving a tax increase or placing one on the people.
So your response to the second part of my last question about that he's going to increase property taxes, what do you say to that?
The logic of his question doesn't make sense. The governor doesn't have an influence on property tax rates.
I don't know.
So he wants
He
to.
said something about it today.
He wants to do. He wants to have 1.5 billion of this income tax increase go. You're familiar with the proposal's been out there for years since Don Hedge and Edgar.
Right.
1.5 billion would go to school districts.
You
that
know,
would agree
I'm
to
all
reduce
for
property taxes.
reducing property taxes dollar for dollar through state generated, which is why I've indicated what I indicated. But I authored a plan to take 10% of natural revenue growth to set aside and ship back to the county treasurers to reduce the education portion of the property tax. That's the way to do it. Not falsely presenting a huge tax increase. I mean, this is the biggest tax increase in the history of Illinois that Governor Quinn proposed. Some of the worst economic times that we've seen in the history of this state. I promise to the people of Illinois that I'm not going to dig deeper into your pockets. I'm not going to raise your tax rates. I'm going to fight off tax increases and make sure it doesn't happen, because that's the true road to creation of jobs.
Senator, can I ask you a question about last Sunday we had a broadcast. I got to sit down with Senator